Representative Tim Murphy was a guest this morning on CNN, and he says that one of the issues is clearly a better or deeper discussion of mental illness.
Well, we have to understand that the stigma we place on mental illness is done by those of us who want to be in denial of mental illness, particularly serious mental illness. When you look at these heinous tragedies that occur, so often as someone with untreated or undertreated serious mental illness, on top of 40,000 plus suicides a year, you're 10 times more likely to be in prison than you are in a hospital if you're mentally ill. We have increased homelessness, joblessness, victimization of the mentally ill. How much is enough before America and Congress says we have got to pass some laws here which change the way, fundamentally, that we approach mental illness? And I think that time is absolutely now.
That is a much broader discussion, and that, again, Tim Ryan from Ohio, who was a guest on, Tim Murphy from Pennsylvania, who was a guest on CNN this morning. I want to turn to, though, a different version of that, and this has to do with suicide. It also has to do with mental health screening relative to the military, because this is another important issue, and with our treatment of vets very much on top of everyone's mind right now, we welcome to the program Representative Glenn GT Thompson, who's a Republican from Pennsylvania. And we want to talk about some legislation that made its way through the House. Congressman, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Morning, Tim. My pleasure.
I should mention, by the way, he tweets at Congressman GT, right? That's your Twitter handle?
That's correct.
Very good. All right, so this legislation has, I guess, made it through the House. Is that correct?
It did. It made it through. We were able to offer this, the MEPS Act, Medical Evaluation Parity for Service Members Act, as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization. And it was actually accepted by voice vote en bloc, and so now it's on its way to the Senate.
So this bill orders the National Institutes of Health to create a universal mental health evaluation for potential recruits that would catch past suicide attempts and psychiatric disorders. So is this a way of screening out those who might find themselves more predisposed, possibly, to suicide?
Well, it is a way of identifying who may have some pre-existing conditions. Tim, the statistics on this are striking, and the idea behind this is it's all part of trying to make sure that we're serving those who serve this nation, and that means providing for our best possible, in the best possible way for their health and well-being. The statistics are striking. You know, more than half of the individuals who are serving in the military that have attempted or completed suicide, it was not their first attempt. Their first attempt was before they joined the military. And we all think that, you know, our mind tends to go, because we've been at war for so long, that most of this is driven by exposure to combat, to being in those theaters of war. And yet the reports show that the majority of individuals who unfortunately take their own lives never saw combat. So it really speaks to some pre-existing conditions that we're just not seeing, because although we do a great physical examination at the time of induction into the military, or even when changing between status of active duty to reserve or guard, any back and forth between any of those, we do a great physical exam, but there's no mental health evaluation that's ever been done.
Once again, Representative Glenn GT Thompson of Pennsylvania is with us. Now, I know that Tim Ryan, who's a Republican, a Democrat from Ohio, is with you on this. And I guess, now, is there a Senate version? Is that the one that's sponsored by Senator Portman and Senator Rockefeller?
It is. I'm so appreciative, first of all, for Congressman Ryan, good friend, colleague. We're working together on this. And we were very pleased that Senator Portman from Ohio and Senator Rockefeller stepped up and introduced the MEPS Act in the Senate. And so I know they're taking the lead in the Senate and working to try to get it. The best possible scenario is where we could get this offered as an amendment in the Senate version of the NDAA. So I know they're working to do that, whether it be accepted coming out of committee or as we did, offered as an amendment on the Senate floor to get it adopted.
Now, I know that this is not strictly a part of your bill, but I'm wondering, once members do get into the military, what is the level of care or that they get for mental health once you're actually in service?
You know, this is something we've been working on for some time. This is actually the MEPS Act is the third in a series of bills. The first two that I wrote have been enacted into law. We're working with the Department of Defense, are really trying hard to address this issue. The STEP Act that the President signed in 2010, I authored, expands access through telemedicine, takes the stigma off of reaching out for help, because you can do that using FaceTime from your dining room table versus the stigma of that first time walking into a bricks and mortar mental health clinic. For those who are leaving the military, my daughter-in-law is in that situation right now, going to veteran status. They used to receive 6 months, just 6 months of transitional assistance to make a successful transition, but the statistics show that the first signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress kick in at 8 to 9 months. So there was a gap, Tim, that was costing lives. Now, the TAMP Act that the President signed, I authored, he signed that in January. That now gives them an additional 6 months through telemedicine, and if they show they have problems, they're provided transitional assistance indefinitely until we make sure that we get a proper handoff into the VA system for continued care. The military has worked hard. This all came actually from a conversation from an Army specialist, one of my constituents. In this situation, turned out to be my son. Tell me about his buddies, that when his unit returned from Iraq, how many had committed suicide. Since that time, the Department of Defense has done a lot of things that it didn't need legislative support, including, training members of the military to look out for each other, to train them what the signs and symptoms are regarding depression, suicide, ideation. The MEPS Act, I think, is the next important step because we introduced that 10 days before this most recent tragic evil shooting event at Fort Hood. And I'm not saying that this would have prevented that, but you don't know. Perhaps we could have caught some signs either when that perpetrator joined the National Guard or went from the National Guard to active duty status, because he would have gone through those evaluation periods at both times.
I'm glad you explained where this came from, because, sometimes we think that laws tend to come often, aside from whether they're just inspirations, light bulbs going off, where the people seem to think that it's lobbyists who bring them up. But in this particular case, you had a personal connection, and as obviously you mentioned, somebody who was a constituent of yours, and that's your son, you said, right?
Oh, yes, sir. And I have to tell you, all of my, and I'll be the first to admit this, all of my best ideas come from my constituents.
Mm-hmm. And in this particular case, so if it gets through the Senate, it's now in the Senate's hands. Is that correct?
That's correct. The House version passed, overwhelming support on Friday, and it's now in the Senate. And the NDAA really is a must-do piece of legislation. Because this is what provides the resources to make sure that our sons and daughters who are serving our country have the resources to be safe, to be effective in doing their jobs in the military. And so the question is whether obviously the Senate includes the MEPS Act as a part of what they do, and then if they do, that's most helpful. They wouldn't have to. Since it passed the House version, the Armed Services Committee, when they go to conference, I hope would work to make sure that the House version is included. But it's a pretty good guarantee if we can get this into the Senate version, then there'll be no real question whether this will be enacted into law. All
right. Well, we appreciate your thoughts on that. Before I go, I want to quickly ask you, today there's a vote scheduled in the House on more legislation relative to the VA facilities, and I wonder if you might give us a sense of how you think that's going to play out.
Well, we need to continue to provide, I think, to hold the VA system accountable. I came out of the healthcare system. I spent 30 years working nonprofit community healthcare hospitals. I was a therapist, a rehab services manager, and a hospital manager. And we've got a supervision problem, and it tends to be, from what I can see, and I get out and visit VA hospitals. Now, I have smaller ones, and they are outstanding. Erie, Pennsylvania, Altoona, Pennsylvania, they do a great job. They know their veterans. They know the veterans' family members. Where we tend to see these problems has been the rather large ones in large cities. And to me, part of that is the sheer size and the level of bureaucracy. So we've got some supervision problems in those. We need to continue to hold them accountable. There needs to be changes. Part of it is entrusting the folks on the grassroots, the VA employees, which I find are largely dedicated individuals. But it's hard for them to make changes when you are working in such a bureaucratic facility. And and obviously there's some folks at the top that have been doing what has been, I think, illegal as a healthcare professional, cooking the books in terms of how they're reporting data in order to qualify for bonuses. And quite frankly, Tim, that's another point. I mean, with the federal government and our deficit that we have, I'm really appalled to find out that we have aspects of the federal government that are still providing bonuses. That is, we're paying people bonuses, from what I can tell, are paying people for doing what they should be doing, the expectation of holding the privilege of holding that job. So we've got a lot more work to do in this area.
Congressman, I appreciate you spending time with us this morning. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Representative Glenn GT Thompson is a Republican. He represents the 5th Congressional District in Pennsylvania and tweets at Congressman GT.